And so that brings me back to my own background, which is, as I mentioned, I started with that question when I was in college about how are we human beings going to deal with our differences? How are we going to deal with our disputes? Not to suppress the differences, but actually how do we harness the differences and actually make them into something positive? And I had the great fortune of meeting, when I had that question, I was studying anthropology, of meeting a professor in a law school, Professor Roger Fisher, and he and I started working on a field that didn't really even have so much of a name yet, but it was the emerging field of negotiation. And we worked on it, and we taught it, and we wrote a book together. And that book was called Getting to Yes. And what was the essence of this method? The essence of the method of getting to yes is not what's often done in Washington, which is where they talk about compromise, and compromise just means it's kind of a split the difference solution between one side and the other, which leaves both sides dissatisfied often. But it's not that compromise is a bad word, although in many quarters it's considered a very bad word to compromise your values. But what we were looking for were methods that would produce genuine solutions. And I remember there was a story kind of an emblematic story that we liked, that came from probably one of the very earliest management theorists in this country, who was a woman actually, who lived in Boston a little more than a century ago. His name was Mary Parker Follett, and she was once in a library just like this, a university library at Harvard. She was watching two students get into a quarrel because one wanted the window open, and the other one would go and shut the window. And then the other would go and open the window, the other would go and shut the window. Finally, the librarian comes over and she asks the first student, well, why do you want the window open? He says, well, I want some fresh air. I need some fresh air. She asks the second one, why do you want the window closed? He said, well, the draft is blowing my papers around. So then she asked the question, well, how do we get you fresh air without you a draft? They talk about it for a while, and then one gets an idea, disappears into the room next door, opens a window there, thus providing fresh air for the first student without a draft for the second. Now, in that very simple solution, that very simple story, you see what's happening here is we often start, as in politics, we start with two positions. There's the Republican position, there's the Democrat position, you start with two positions, and they get into a big quarrel, they bother everyone. But the whole idea of getting to yes is to look behind those positions for what are the underlying interests? What do people really need? What are the real needs there? In one case, it was fresh air. In the other sense, it was no draft, by asking that magical question, why? And by doing that, you end up with a solution that's not just a half-open window, which is a compromise, which might be too much draft, not enough fresh air, but a creative, innovative, integrative solution, like an open window in the next room. So my question is, what does it take for our politics to be able to do that very simple process of going behind our positions, the things we say we want, the things we demand, the positions we take on various policies, try to understand the interests of both sides, of all sides, in fact, because there are many parties, and then try to tap into our innate human creativity to see if we can come up with solutions that are better for everyone. So that's the challenge.